This episode is brought to you by Vineyard Boise Church's 10th annual Summer Movie Night. Join this free community party on July 14th. This year's movie is Star Wars: The Empire Strikes Back. The movie will play on a 40-foot globe screen after sundown, but the field opens at 8:30 p.m. for activities, including bounce houses, glow sticks, and concessions. This free event is in partnership with Future Public School, Go Team Therapy Dogs, R2L2 Country Dance, and more. So bring your own lawn chairs and blankets to 4950 North Bradley Street in Garden City. Learn more about the Vineyard Boise Church at vineyardboise.org. That's vineyardboise.org.
Today on CityCast Boise, 36 years after Joyce Casper was found murdered, Boise police say her killer has finally been found. KTVB's Alex Duggan is here to walk us through how Boise detectives cracked the case and why one retired detective said her death impacted him like no other in his career. It's Thursday, July 13th. I'm Emma Arnold, and this is what Boise's talking about. We wanted to have you on to talk about this story that you wrote because it's such an interesting case. So why don't you start by telling us about this cold case and why it got reopened?
Right. So Joyce Casper, she was 65 years old and she was killed in her car outside of the shop that she worked at on Vista. So in 1987, she owned a Hallmark store. It was like a gift shop and she would often work late hours. But this night on October 13th was different because I think she left about 9, and police say she was abducted outside, like walking to her car, which was a really short distance. So they think that this person was kind of lying in wait for her. And then from my understanding, police said that she was strangled by some type of ligature, and then she was sexually assaulted, and the perpetrator drove her car with her in it about 2 blocks from where she usually parked. So then her car was found on kind of by these railroad tracks off of Day Drive behind the business. And it was just, there was just like no leads. Like police said that they talked to everybody, they had no witnesses. Nothing really came of it. They had a ton of people on their list, but nothing happened.
Yeah, it sounds like a ton of work went into this case. Over 145 suspects were investigated and cleared. They did a ton of follow-up, a ton of interviews, and, the only, maybe slightly they had was that she had, before her death, reported a young man had tried to assault her at the store but ran off. So they kind of had maybe a small lead there, but how did they finally solve it? It sounds like they had been stumped for quite a while.
Right. So, this case was continually reopened, just assigned to new detectives. So from my experience with other cold cases I've written about, somebody gets promoted, somebody leaves the department, and that cold case is passed along to somebody else. And then that person has to go through everything that the person that was working on it before went through. So it takes time. And places like Boise, these cold cases are usually assigned to a homicide detective who also has other cases they're working on and can work on this in their spare time. But eventually, at some point, Detective Josiah Ransom was placed on the case, and he started working with Parabon Nanolabs, which is how the Golden State Killer was found, or how other serial killers were found. Developing kind of what this person would have looked like back then, and then following up. So they developed this phenotype of what he would look like, and it showed that he was probably a Latino man from Puerto Rico, and that he was young at the time of the crime from the DNA left at the crime scene. And that really didn't give them much, but at least it helped narrow down their pool of suspects, right? So then Ransom was promoted, and Detective Paul J. Gosh began working on it, and he was like, well, what about if we sent this to a genealogy database? So he started working with Identifinders International, and he just went back and forth, creating this giant family tree of the profile and like who he thinks is in this family. And it was just really bizarre how he came to finding the person that probably, or that they say killed Joyce. Was he found a brother who said, I might have a half brother who lives in Idaho, but I don't know. So then he goes back to his family tree, finds these two sons of the guy he thinks committed this crime, goes to Los Angeles. These children are older now, they're unhoused. He finds them somehow on the streets of LA, gets them to a Starbucks, is swabbing their cheeks in a Starbucks, and then it comes back as a match that they're the kids for the suspect who we now know is Frank Rodriguez.
That is wild that they were able to pursue that down that family tree. One thing from your story that really stuck out to me that I thought was really interesting was that Detective Lance Anderson said that no case in his 27 years had the same impact on him, that it stayed with him his entire life. Why do you think that was?
Well, I mean, Lance Anderson, so when I spoke to him on Sunday, he was the first detective that was on the scene. And he was the initial investigator. So, and this kind of rocked the community from my understanding, because Joyce was such a like lovely, well-known woman in that area. People knew her store, people knew her. And he described it as just like horrific. Like it doesn't really sit right with you not knowing who did this all these years. And then he kept just going back to it, and he kept double checking with all the investigators on the case throughout the years, offering his help, offering, his thoughts. He said, I would get a gut feeling, I would call them, he was still working, even though he retired in 2005, but he was still, just so tied to this case. I mean, if you just think about how that one, I think police always have one case that sticks with them, and I think that was it for Lance Anderson, is what it sounded like, because and just to hear his kind of the relief in his voice, like he said, it was a great relief that this day came finally, because he worked so hard in the beginning and he had to retire not knowing what happened. Now he's here to see it.
You were there for the, the press release where they announced that they had found Joyce Kasper's killer. And could you describe the emotions and reactions you witnessed when it was announced that the case was finally solved? I know that they did a commemoration of all the officers involved.
So they held a press conference on Sunday when the family could be here. And I remember thinking when the news came in, I was like, no way, because this case is so, it's so old. It's almost 40 years old. And I was like losing my mind in the newsroom. And then, we get to Sunday, and I think like I walked in and everyone was very, very, I feel like relaxed, happy. The detectives were kind of mingling with the family. They had treats set out. They had water. They had like this whole, they had pictures of her. They had the deputy chief of police there. They had all the old detectives from the case there, the retired ones that had worked on it and left. We had the new detectives there. It was really nice. I think the way that they went about it, like they very clearly never gave up on the case, even though it seemed like there was a lot of dead ends.
So the man police say killed her, Frank Rodriguez, he died by suicide in 2007. And I just think, do you think her family was able to have any resolution from this case being solved? Did it seem like, they were there, you saw them. Did it seem like they were able to find closure in this, even though he technically wasn't, I guess, brought to justice?
I actually spoke personally with her family, and so it was actually her children who showed up, her 3 kids. And they had never thought that this case would be solved. They never thought that justice would come for their mom. And they also described it as a relief. They just said, we're just happy to know that the police did their job and that this was a relief. We never thought this day would come, but here it is. And they described her as just, vivacious and kind. And one of her daughters said that, she went to South Junior High, which was kind of right across the street from there. And all the kids would come over and get sodas at her store and stuff like that. So people never really lost sight of what happened to her is what her daughter said. Even years later, she would go to, high school reunions and her mom would be brought up. And so, yeah, I think it's just a relief for them. And to be honest, it's interesting though, because so Frank Rodriguez, he lived in Idaho. He lived in other states too. He also lived in Caldwell, and I think that's where he died. But it's crazy because, talking to the detectives, they usually say, like, if someone commits this type of heinous crime, they usually have done it before, or they escalate and will do it again. And so police are still thinking that it's possible he has committed other crimes. And so they're still asking for information for like anyone that had known him at the time or throughout their life to contact them, because there could be other unsolved cases that he may be involved with. And, when I talked to Detective Jagosh, he just said that speaking with his family, it's a struggle to think that he is not the perpetrator, because just what he knows about him, and like criminal profiling, his personality fits the bill pretty well. But the family of Rodriguez was very cooperative, and Jagosh said that they were completely shocked, and that this felt like a kind of like a death notification for him, because his family is just horrified.
Oh yeah, I can't even imagine.
Yeah, so it's very complicated, but I can't believe that this was actually solved, because it took so long. But it does give us hope for other cases that are unsolved and that police have DNA for, because investigative genealogy is so prominent now that I think a lot of the cases from the 70s or 80s are going to start popping up again.
Had you heard of this case before it was solved?
Yes, I have. I have heard of this case. When I worked at the Idaho Press, I was doing a lot of cold case stories, and this was definitely one that had come up. But because when I was working there, they had just reopened it, so it was very hush-hush as to what was going on with the case, and they were making a lot of traction, I think. So I didn't really have the ability to kind of get into it, but I've definitely heard of it, and I think a lot of people in the Boise area have also heard of it. So I think that it's a good day to see something like that happen.
Well, Alex, we are always thinking of you, and we really appreciate you bringing this story to us, because it's pretty incredible that the family was able to get this closure. So thanks so much for coming on, and we love having you.
Thank you.
And an update on a story we brought you before. Idaho Press is reporting that Donald Haida, the Meridian police officer who punched 31-year-old Colt Stewart 6 times while he was being arrested, did not mention his use of violence against Stewart in his police report. Haida describes Stewart elbowing him and mentions that Stewart had broken bones, but didn't report repeatedly punching him in the head. That's all for today here on CityCast Boise. If you enjoyed the show, leave us a review. It helps other people find us. We'll be back tomorrow morning for your weekly news roundup. Bye.